2000s comedies are some of the greatest movies of all time. And so I wanted to know what your favorites were. And I've got a real bone to pick with some of your rankings. So what I did was I went to IMDB and did an advanced search for R-rated comedies between the years of 2000 and 2009 with at least 100,000 user rankings. I excluded the rare movie that I haven't seen and the movie with a super liberal definition of comedy. Django Unchained, for example, was one of the movies on this list, and it's a good movie, but it's not exactly what I would categorize as a 2000s comedy. And some of the movies not on the list are honestly shocking, and we'll get into these snubs at the end of the rankings. And kicking things off at number 10 with Forgetting Sarah Marshall. And this is really the only one on the list that I didn't really care for. I mean, it's got a great cast. It stars Jason Segel, Kristen Bell, Mila Kunis, Russell Brand, and they're all great. And Paul Rudd, one of my favorite comedic actors of all time, plays a supporting role, but I really just didn't connect with this one at all. We follow struggling musician Peter, who travels to Hawaii to get over a recent breakup, but is horrified to learn his ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend are staying at the same hotel. The cast is strong. Nick Stroller, he's a solid director. Judd Apatow had a hand in the film too. I mean, it's like all the ingredients are there, and I didn't hate this film, but I really did not connect with this one at all. It's definitely not on my rewatch list. And judging by how highly rated this one was by you, this is definitely a hot take on my end, but you know, art's subjective. And getting into number 9, I Love You Man, starring Jason Segel as well. I'm probably gonna look like a Jason Segel hater for putting his two movies as number 10 and number 9 on this list, but yeah, I mean, yeah. Paul Rudd, again, one of my favorite comedy actors, he actually stars in this one. And it tells the story about a dedicated real estate agent who doesn't have any friends and is desperate to find a best man before his wedding. This is another movie that if I was ranking my top 10 2000s comedies of all time, that I would not include in my top 10 at all. But Paul Rudd is Paul Rudd, and he holds the movie together. And I will at least say that this movie does a very strong job at making you feel. And I guess at the end of the day, that really is the goal of a screenplay, is to make you feel emotions. And this one definitely does. I just don't find this one anywhere near as funny as pretty much any of the other movies on this list. Jason Segel is a very good actor. Paul Rudd is the cream of the crop when it comes to comedic actors. Maybe that's something worth exploring deeper at another date, is why didn't I connect with this movie or Forgetting Sarah Marshall to the way I did with the rest of the ones. But getting into number 8, we've got The Royal Tenenbaums, and my favorite movie directed by Wes Anderson. The movie follows the story of Royal Tenenbaum, an estranged father who reunites with his family after the diagnosis of a terminal illness, or at least so he says. And this isn't one of the funnier movies on the list, hence the number 8 ranking, but the writing, directing, and acting is outstanding. And I mean, the cast in this movie also is just unfair. I mean, we've got Gene Hackman, Bill Murray, Luke Wilson, Owen Wilson, Ben Stiller, and something you might not know is that Owen Wilson actually co-wrote this movie. Yeah.
Did you say you're on mescaline?
I did indeed.
Getting into number 7, and we're starting to get to the more funny ones on the list. We've got Tropic Thunder, written, directed, and co-starring Ben Stiller. The movie also stars Robert Downey Jr. and Jack Black. The movie follows the cast of a war movie who are dropped into what they didn't realize is an actual war zone, and shit gets real. It's a really funny movie with a really strong story to balance it out. And this movie carried a whopping budget of $92 million. That is insane for a comedy movie, and honestly, that's insane for most movies. And to put this into perspective, inflation adjusted, this movie's budget is 32% higher than that of the 2023 blockbuster Oppenheimer. And this movie has sparked a ton of controversy for some lines written about people with intellectual disabilities, and of course, Robert Downey Jr. was in blackface the entire movie. And at a core level, obviously, these things aren't great, but I think people who are outraged by this movie, I think a lot of them just did not watch the movie because they completely missed the point. A big point of why these things were in the movie were to act as satire for people who actually thought these things were okay. And Ben Stiller has even doubled down in 2023, saying he makes no apologies for this movie. And good on you, Ben.
Everybody knows you never go full retard.
And on a lighter note, moving on to number 6 on the list, which is Judd Apatow Apatow's directorial debut in the 40-year-old Virgin starring Steve Carrell, which tells the story about a man who has not lost his virginity yet, and when his coworkers find out, they make it a mission to make sure that he loses it. This movie actually ended up being surprisingly heartfelt, and you'll see that with Judd Apatow's movies. A lot of them are really funny, but when you get into these movies and you get to the climax and the credits roll and you realize that this movie was actually really deep. In addition to Steve Carell, we also get outstanding performances from Elizabeth Banks, Leslie Mann, and Paul Rudd, and Paul is really what did it for me with this movie. He is just so talented at a comedic level. I would say only Vince Vaughn I would rank ahead of him. Without Paul, I definitely would not have laughed as hard as I did, and this movie would not be as high as it is in my rankings.
I'm going to kill everyone in the store and put a bullet in my brain.
Number 5, we've got the holiday classic Child. This is one of those movies that was on TV, cable television, if you remember what that is. You know, it's a very different movie, like when you have all those commercials and you have it censored and they just straight up take a few scenes out. And oh my God, this movie is so funny. I gained so much respect for Billy Bob Thornton. And I like Billy Bob Thornton a lot. I've always thought he was a great actor. After watching this, like, he just skyrocketed my rankings of actors. Every minute he's on screen, I am just laughing so hard. And that is so hard to do, especially as someone who is involved in comedy, someone who's written comedy screenplays, directed comedy features, has acted in those features. It's no small feat what he did. This is one of the most iconic comedy movie performances of all time. And the kid in the movie, he too is putting on a masterclass in comedic acting. It's really hard to believe at such a young age that he could put on such a great performance. I mean, he did such a better job than most seasoned actors who have been in the industry for 20, 30, 40 years could even dream of putting on.
Whoa, shit!
We've got Old School up next, and it's about three 30-somethings who seek to relive their college glory days by moving onto a college campus and starting their own fraternity. And he'd already done Swingers, but this was really Vince Vaughn's breakout comedic role into the Vince Vaughn fast-talking, yabbering guy that we know and love so much from the 2000s. The script as a whole is very strong, but what really stands out to me in this movie is just casual conversation, just how funny everyone is. Funny side story, this was actually the second unedited R-rated movie I've ever seen. We watched this when I was in 8th grade on a Friday night, and I have no idea how this movie got chosen. My mom was anti-R-rated movies. Someone sawing their leg off to her would be more appropriate than 13-year-old me seeing a boob on screen for 2 seconds, just to put things into perspective. It was hilarious even at that age, even though a lot of the things probably did go over my head. And I don't think my dad really cared that much. I think he was more so enjoying the movie, but like my mom was there and one of my brothers was there. You could just feel like the anger in my living room. I really went back and forth between putting this at number 5 and Bad Santa at number 4. I'd be curious to hear in the comments if you prefer Bad Santa or Old School.
I gave this to you for your wedding.
And enough about Old School, but not enough about Todd Phillips, because at number 3, we've got another movie that he directed in the cultural phenomenon that was The Hangover, and is about a bachelor party in Vegas gone wrong when the groom-to-be goes missing 2 days before his wedding and is still missing a day later. It is no exaggeration to call it a cultural phenomenon. It is the movie that literally everyone was talking about, similar to how Deadpool and Wolverine in 2024 and Barbenheimer in 2023 were really the talk of the town when it came to movies. And at its release, this was the highest grossing R-rated comedy movie of all time. It brought in $469 million globally and would of course spur the 2 sequels. Fun fact about this movie that I actually never knew is that this entire movie was shot in 15 days, which is insane. I mean, most Hollywood features are shot in 30 to 90 days. 30 days would be like a very low budget indie movie or a low budget that a studio's taken a chance on. To think that a movie that was doing as well at the box office as The Hangover, to think that that movie was made in half the time.
Wow.
Every scene hits. They realistically were probably doing a lot of scenes in 2 to 3 takes. You know, the reason why I know that they were probably only getting things done in a few takes was I actually recently just directed a comedy movie titled Hometown Summer that's very much in the vein of 2000s comedies that we shot in 10 days. And And there were scenes that we got in one take, and I would say the average was about 2 takes. We realistically could have shot Hometown Summer in about the same time that The Hangover was shot in. And if you're interested in learning more about Hometown Summer, which tells the story of 3 childhood best friends whose plan to attend the same college is thrown for a whirl in a crazy summer that is filled with drugs, sex, and bad business decisions, you can sign up for my email list at hometownsummer.com. And if you sign up for my email list, I will also send you a free copy of my first feature titled Rosetta Stone. And you can also follow Hometown Summer's progress on Instagram at Wolverines Productions, or by subscribing to this YouTube channel, and I will be including all of those links in the description and in the pinned comment below. But back to the list, we've got Superbad coming in at number 2, which is not only number 2 on this list, but also very likely number 2 on my favorite movies of all time, not just comedies. Superbad follows high school seniors Seth and Evan on an adventurous night involving a plan to score booze, party, and get laid. This is another movie that really put its thumbprint on society. You hear it quoted all the time, and you see people all the time wearing McLovin shirts. This movie isn't just hilarious, but it's also balanced out with engaging and universally relatable dramatic beats. And this movie was also the debut role of Emma Stone and Christopher Mintz-Plasse. Who knew? And Christopher was just 17 at the time this movie was shot, so his mom had to be with him on set for every single scene that was shot, including his sex scene.
I'll be over at State where the girls are half as smart and thus twice as likely to fillet me.
And number 1, what else but Wedding Crashers? And if you could tell by me saying that Superbad was probably my second favorite movie of all time, this is obviously my favorite all-around movie of all time. The movie follows Jeremy Gray and John Beckwith, 2 best friends who find their way into countless weddings, often passing as family of the bride or groom. Things change when John falls for a bridesmaid at one of the weddings they crash. From frame 1 to the credits, everything is just perfect. The direction by Dave Dobkin to the performances by Vince Vaughn, Owen Wilson, Christopher Walken, Rachel McAdams, Jane Seymour, Bradley Cooper. And this is a movie that I fall in love with again every single time I see it. And I actually had the opportunity to speak with Larry Joe Campbell, who plays the role of the best man at one of the weddings, and Marcus Treek, who was a production assistant and extra in the film, on my podcast. If you think you would find these sorts of interviews entertaining, I will include those in the description and pinned comment as well. But that rounds out my top 10 of your 10 favorite R-rated comedy movies of the 2000s, and you can see now we've got my list versus your list. As you can see, Wedding Crashers is criminally underrated, while The Royal Tenenbaums is a bit overrated. We can't seriously put it in the same universe as Wedding Crashers. Getting into the snubs, Eurotrip definitely stands out as the biggest overall snub on this list. I mean, that would probably be number 4 on my top 10. The other biggest snub that comes to mind is Role Models, starring Paul Rudd and Seann William Scott. Just a fantastic all-around movie. I'm sure there's a movie on this top 10 list that you would definitely want to swap out in place of Role Models. Road Trip is another iconic classic. Sequels of American Pie 2 and American Wedding. Not Another Teen Movie is another one that I would definitely put ahead of Forgetting Sarah Marshall and I Love You Man. But I'm curious what movies you think got snubbed. And now that we've gotten through this list, you probably noticed something, and that's that these comedy movies are still dominating the discussion today. But why do 2000s comedy movies still leave such a big mark on society? It may not be for the reasons you think, and I break it all down here.